Jesus' name, amen. All right, 2 Kings chapter 5 is where we are. Some of this is going to be tied into the fact that we are doing baptisms, but regardless, it is good sometimes just to take a break. We're in the narrative of Matthew. We're going to kind of jump into a completely different narrative right now. If you grew up in church, you know the story of Naaman, but I always actually really enjoy moments when if you didn't grow up in church, like I didn't grow up in church, and then they'd read through the Old Testament stories and everyone would be like, yeah. And I was just jacked. I remember the first time that I learned about the rainbow being God's promise, that God would never flood the earth again. And I wish I could say I was lying about this, but I was so excited. I went to the pastor. I'm some like 17-year-old kid. He doesn't know who I am. I'm like, dude, I don't know if you know this, but I was reading in Genesis. Every time we see a rainbow, that's God's promise that he's never going to flood the earth. And he's like, right? I was so excited to learn these simple truths. And Naaman is a guy that his story is somewhat popular, but even if you grew up in church, you might honestly have never heard of him before. So we're going to go through the story. I'll explain why and what that looks like. So if you want to crack open your word, we're going to be in 2 Kings 5. Some context, just so you know, larger context. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. If you could think of 1 Samuel predominantly being about Saul, okay? 2 Samuel predominantly being about David. 1 Kings predominantly being about Elijah and Solomon then Elijah, and then 2 Kings predominantly being about Elisha. So there's Elijah and Elijah. The first 17 books in your Old Testament are all the story of the Old Testament, and then everything past that is like wisdom literature, prophecy, and all that, okay? So we're a little bit smarter when it comes to the Bible. We're picking it up in 2 Kings chapter 5, and in 2 Kings 5 is that whole time during Elisha, S-H, okay? So Elisha. Now, Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. First of all, can I just acknowledge, this is really good storytelling. If you ever want to read anything, it's really good to set something up and then the problem, okay? Now, here's a few things to point out. We're going to do what we normally do in Matthew. We're going to go through this thing verse by verse, chapter by chapter. It says, Naaman is the commander of the army of Syria, and yet notice in the text, he's a great man and has high favor with the master, because by the Lord, you see that? Because by the Lord, he had given victory to Syria. Now, if you're not familiar with the Old Testament, the people of God who's Israel, they are conquered by three types of people: the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Syrians. We actually went hard in the Minor Prophets looking at the Syrians. Now, this text just told us that God gives the commander of the Syrians, Naaman, he gives him favor to conquer Israel. Now, if you're reading the Bible and you know at all anything about the Old Testament, that sounds really weird. That shouldn't take place. But the reason it's going on, if you know at all of the story, is the people of God continue to be warned. They don't heed the warnings. And then inevitably what happens is God is going to punish them. And he uses Syria to punish them. Specifically, we get some color in this painting. We get Naaman is the commander of the army to punish the Israelites. All right, so if you're kind of looking at, and some words, if you want to look at that text there again, he's a mighty man of valor. Can you see that? And he's a great man before his master. He's a man of honor. So we have no reason to believe, and I'll say before this, he's absolutely not a believer. He's a pagan, but he's still a man of honor. I think some of us kind of know those people who kind of act right, man of honor. We think of Mormons, to be honest with you. That's real time, first service. Not as many people are here to say something like that. But that's honestly what I think of, right? Honor when you think of somebody like that, but they're not believers. Verse 2. Now the Syrians, on one of their raids, had carried off a little girl from the land of Israel, and she worked in the service of Naaman's wife. So now we get this picture. That's Naaman. Well, Naaman, in conquering these people, they carry off the people. Usually they make them slaves of some kind. And what inevitably happens is a little girl's ripped from her family, and now she's put in a place where she serves the wife of Naaman. Okay? A little more color on the picture. She said to her mistress, "Would that my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." So Naaman went and told his Lord, thus and so spoke the girl from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." Now remember that little girl, she sees what's going on, because Naaman, though he's a man of honor, though he's a man of prestige, he's conquered a lot of people, he's in the early stages of having leprosy. All right? And so if you're not familiar with leprosy, I think most of us are. It's this skin-eating disease. It really attacks the nerves, so that parts of your nose, your whole nose, fingers can just fall off, and you wouldn't even be aware of it. So he's on the early stages of this. And so the girl sees this and goes, honestly, I wish that Now, whether she's talking to herself or in the narrative, she's talking to her mistress here in this moment. I wish that he would know about this prophet in Israel because he can be healed, all right? Now, I just want to stop. This is a quick side note. If there's ever a beautiful picture, maybe the highest picture, that's ringing, right? I'm not crazy? Okay, maybe it's got to stay right here in the middle. Stay in front of the cross. That's my life. Okay. So if there's ever a picture of loving your enemies, this would be it. Imagine I'm just thinking of my daughter, my 9-year-old daughter. If she's ripped from us as her family, and then she's told to serve this woman in a foreign land, and then for her as Eve to care about Naaman, who ripped her from her family, it speaks insane amounts of who this little girl is. And we don't even know who she is. We're never told anything about her, but I think it's wild. And then it goes on in the story, as I just read in verse 4, Naaman then goes to his king and says, this little girl just mentioned there's a possibility of a cure. If you've ever known somebody who has a terminal illness, how desperate they can be to be fixed, they're going to try any experimental things going on. They hear about this prophet who can heal him. So he goes to the king. He says, hey, listen, I heard about this prophet. I want to be able to go. Now, the king, obviously, of Syria, he's like an owner of a franchise, or he's like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. When you have in a franchise a star player, you're going to do everything you can to take care of them. Well, he's the commander of the army. You're going to do everything that you can. If you Fortune 500 company, you've got a key figure in your company, you're going to do everything that you can to retain them. This is what the king is trying to do. The king of Syria hears something's is going on with Naaman, the commander of his army, who he's conquered. He's had a lot of favor in conquering not just Israel, but a lot of people. And if you look at Syrian history, so in conquering those people, he goes, let's figure it out. And the statement that you can see there, he says, and the king of Syria said, go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman's off. He's going to go with this letter to the king of Israel. Here's how much he cares about him. The king of Syria cares about Naaman. So he went, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Now, I don't know how much time I'll have in the 9:30 and 11, but I got a couple more minutes in this service, so I thought I'd put a little bit of Bible knowledge on us. Sometimes we read amounts of money and we have no idea what's going on. So let me just kind of tell you, at least do my best to paint how money works in the Old Testament, even parts of the early of the New Testament. So the best way we can understand how much money he takes is if you go back to 1 Kings, I wrote it here in my notes, 16. 1 Kings 16 and verse 24, there's a guy named King Omri, O-M-R-I. He buys the hill that Samaria sits on. So back in Israel, there's, if you know anything about Samaria, it sits on this gigantic mountain of a hill on this plain there. Well, Omri buys the hill, and he buys it for 2 talents. Now, I know we think of everything through like coins, pennies, nickels, dollars. Well, coins and stuff weren't created for about another 200 years, 700 BC, okay? Everything back then, if you've ever wondered, why are they using talents or shekels or denarii? What those are not actually coins, they're actually weights, how much they weigh. A talent is the heaviest amount that we can get. So I want to do some math with you. Maybe this is a little bit nerdy, but let me just kind of break it down how this works, all right? So 2 talents to buy all of Samaria, all right? He brings 10 talents of silver. Now, if you want to know what a talent is, a talent, this is going to sound so nerdy, but it's 8 o'clock. Who wants to learn about Bible currency, right? Okay, a talent would equal 3,000 shekels. Okay, that means nothing to any of us, all right? Now, here's why that matters. 3,000 shekel. A half of shekel is what's called a denarii, and that's a temple tax. Now, the reason that matters, I promise this is all going to make sense in a second. The reason that matters is a half of a shekel is what it costs to get into the temple. You can read about this in Levitical law. Now, the reason that it is a half of a shekel or a denarii is because that's a day's wages, all right? So now I want you to work the equation backwards, okay? Half a shekel, so a whole shekel is 2 days' wages. He brings, just do the math, go all the way back to 3,000 shekels, which is a full talent, which he brings 10 talents. He brings 60,000 day wages, 60,000 days worth of money, or about 170 years, all right? So I did the math, fun fact. If you take 170 years, times it, let's go on the low end, about a 40,000 year job, you roughly get about $8 million, okay? So he's taking now $8 million. That's just the silver. The king gives him $8 million of modern currency, right? This is Floyd Mayweather, right? Just walking around with all this money, walking around in a duffel bag. He's traveling with $8 million plus the gold that he got, plus all the clothing, which honestly might be worth more than the gold that he has. He's carrying all this around to go give to this prophet or this king in Israel, all right? Now we're smart, all right? There we go, all right? If you've ever wondered. Verse 6, and he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent you Naaman, my servant, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes and he said, am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Only consider and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me. I mean, look at these verses. So king of Syria, if I haven't already said this, his name is Ben-Hadad. He thinks for some reason the prophet is under the authority, and in some ways he is, but under the authority of the king, as if he can go to the king and have his commander, his prophet, heal his commander, right? That's what he's thinking is going on. But as you can read it here towards the end of verse 7, what it's Durham is the king of Israel at this time. He sees what's going on and he goes, how am I supposed to do this? He thinks the king of Syria is trying to create more trouble, trying to create a quarrel. He's already got his people. He wants to cause more of a fight, and he equates it to raising the dead. He goes, how could I possibly raise the dead? Which, fun fact, Durham, that's going to happen at some point in your history. But verse 8, but when Elijah, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, he sent to the king saying, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, that he may know that there's a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots, stood at the door of Elijah's house. If you can, look down real quick to verse 15. You're going to see in verse 15, he has a company with him. So he goes to the king. He leaves there. He goes outside of Samaria to this small little house. It's Elijah's house, and he's standing at the door. A company that he has, I mean, he's got a lot of money, so he needs a whole company. Could be up to about 250 people. I mean, you're protecting 7 mil, maybe 10 mil with all the other stuff. So they're protecting 250 people are standing at the door of Elijah because Elijah heard about the king tearing his clothes, says, send him to me. So that's what happens. He goes to the door of Elijah. All right. So here's what happens in verse 10. And Elijah sent out a messenger to him saying, go wash in the Jordan 7 times and your flesh will be restored and you shall be clean. Hilarious, right? Because here is this great commander of the commanding army that conquers Israel. He doesn't even come out to meet him. He sends a servant out to him. Naaman's traveled probably 150 miles on foot to get here. Elijah just sends out this, and he gives them this command. It's a twofold result. He prophetically speaks the results, but he says, go dip yourself in the Jordan River 7 times. And you can see, if you look at the text again, 2 things are going to take place. Number 1, he's going to be restored, and number 2, he's going to be clean. Can you see that? I think that's intentional. It's a little foreshadowing of what's going on. I know that the Jordan River is pretty popular in the Bible. A lot of you guys are familiar with after Israel goes to the Red Sea, there's another parting of water from the Jordan River for them to get into the Promised Land. Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River. What you might not be aware of is the Jordan River is pretty muddy. It's not the cleanest river, to be honest with you. There are parts that are fast flowing and a little bit better, but honestly, for the most part, it's kind of meanders, like the meandering river, and it's pretty muddy. And I remember being in Africa, and we went to this is probably 2007, 2008. We went there for 2 reasons. One is to help this church build a church at the time and help provide some funds for them, but also do some education there because we were in this spot. I mean, we were in the mud hut area. We were helping people build their huts with mud. We were way out in the Banshees out there. Well, what we had found was there was a lot of eye disease going on. So one of the other reasons we went out there was to educate them, and that a lot of these kids were swimming in this muddy water. Now, FYI, like inside muddy water is like amoeba, bacteria. So when you have a skin disease, the last place you want to go is a muddy river, right? And Elijah is just throwing down the hammer here, saying, go into this muddy river. And I'm not saying it's just like slosh. It is flowing, but it's not the cleanest river. And you're going to see there's some other options out there here in a second. This is what happens in verse 11. But Naaman was angry, and he went away saying, behold, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. And then he goes on also in verse 12, are not Abana and Pharpah, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. Elijah's making the commander of the Syrian army both in a rage and angry. Hilarious. 2 issues that are going on. If you're looking at your Bibles, look at one's found in verse 11, the other's found in 12. Naaman's super upset right now. Number 1, because he doesn't come out, which we just saw in the narrative. He expects him to do his like Harry Potter ipso clino thing. He says, wave his hand over him. He's upset that he doesn't do that, right? And then the second thing is, look at it. He's upset that he tells him to go into the Jordan for the reasons I just brought up. He actually brings up 2 other rivers there. Can you see the 2 other rivers? Abana and Pharpar. Abana was called by the Greeks at this time the Golden River. Both these rivers that Naaman mentions, he's totally right. They're not only in the same distance away, or maybe a little bit further, but honestly not that bad, but they're flowing waters that you can actually drink from. They're crystal clear waters. So those are options, or I got this muddy river of the Jordan, right? And he's upset for those two reasons. One, he doesn't come out. Like, who does this guy think he is? Number two, he's telling me to go wash myself in a disgusting river, right? All right, let's keep going on and find out what happens. So he's going away in a rage, wants nothing to do with what's going on. When he gets back, there's going to be some heads that roll in Israel. But verse 13 says, but his servant came near and said to him, my father, it is a great word that the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean? Again, can we just see the thread of this? Another servant. So this commander says, think about this, like consider this. And Naaman again considers it, changes direction, and here's what happens in verse 14. So he went down. That's what happens. So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. And here it is, just like Elijah said, 2 parts, notice it. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Okay? So he listens, he's obedient. His flesh is restored like a little child, but also notice the second one. It seems almost redundant, but it's not. And he was clean. Now, I think what the word just said here is that Naaman became a believer. And I would like to spend the rest of our time defending that, okay? Defending why in this moment Naaman became a believer. Now, to do this in its entirety, let's keep reading in the text. I want to read 15 through 17, then I promise we're done with the text. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all of his company, and he came and he stood before him and he said, behold, I know that there is no God in all of the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servants. We're not told the present, but we are given a lot of the money, right? Elijah's got at least 7 mil access here, maybe half of that if some went to the king. But he said, as the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none. Prosperity Gospels can hear some of that. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, if not, please let there be given to your servants 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on, your servant will will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifices to any God but the Lord. Okay, can you see? So he goes back to Elijah and he says, listen, let me give you some of this cash. I don't want any of that cash. Okay, can I just ask a request? Can I fill up 2 mule loads of dirt? Now that sounds really odd, but we actually have modern day religions that base a lot of what they do on geographical location. We have Muslims today that will only pray towards Mecca. A lot of Native American and Aborigine religions find their way in certain landmarks and all that. We even get, honestly, a lot of in the New Age stuff, certain mountains like in Sedona or caverns have mystical crystals that can somehow heal your body or whatever it is. We still have some of that, like what's going on. His declaration is the same here, and he's still, he's a new believer. New believers say crazy things sometimes, right? And so what he's doing, he said, let me fill this dirt, and his plan is he's only going to worship the God of Israel on Israel's soil from now on. That's the plan. That's what he wants to do. This is a declaration that I'm no longer going to offer burnt offerings, sacrifices to false gods. I serve the God of Israel. And I think this is a fulfillment of this, of exactly what Elijah said would be done. Look at it again, if we can. This is where we're going to start to wind this down. Look back at verse 14, at the end of it. His flesh was restored like that, the flesh of a little child, right? We've got a few foster babies right now, and it's so impossible not to keep kissing them. It's like just impossible. I want to bite their little cheeks. I want to squeeze their little fat arms, right? Okay? Because their skin is so soft and you just want to squish them, right? There's endorphins coming. There's something about like fresh skin. Here's like Naaman, like a little child, his skin, who knows all the battle scars he had from war. His flesh is totally restored here, and it feels redundant, but it's not. And he was clean. And this is where I want to wind down. There are 2 things that I think we can pull from this story. The first one is this, and he was clean, in Hebrew is the same word for restored. Now, if it feels redundant, it's not. Let me draw your attention real quick back to, I said, the good storytelling. Look back again at verse 1 and 2, if we could, just verse 1 actually. So it gives us this description of this commander of the Syrian army. We got that right. He's in high favor. We know a little bit about him. He's a man of valor. But then we got the problem. The problem was, even though all this is true about him, he's a leper. That's the problem. Now, we do the same thing, okay? Here's what we do. We think the problem is this. And so I want to get this taken care of. And I can't tell you how often as a pastor I see this. If I can get to God so he would fix this, because God's, of course, a means to an end, right? If I can use God for this purpose, the issue is if I had this job, or if I was dating this person, or if I could figure out this thing with education after graduation, or if I can do this with my, whatever this is, if I had this amount of money, that's the issue. But that's not the issue. Not the issue with Naaman is he doesn't just go into the water according to Elijah's word to wash away his leprosy. He goes in there to wash away his pride. I mean, the whole story is this like antithetical approach, this back and forth with pride and then this like humility. It starts with this little servant girl. It gets into muddy water. It's brought back by another servant, all juxtaposition to this commander of this great Syrian army. He doesn't just need his leprosy figured out. We do this all the time. I need this figured out. Listen, God cares about the job and he cares about the spouse and he cares about the work. He cares about all of it. But he cares more about your heart. He cares more about your pride. And so this feels redundant in verse 14. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child. And he was clean. But you can easily put in there, and he was restored. Nehemiah's posture from the creator to creation, full humanity understanding of a biblical worldview is put back in place. You had this mixed up. You think it's by your power. You think it's by your clout. But now he's restored. Not just clean, he's restored. He's made new, not just physically, but he's made new, ultimately in eternity. But so much so that one day you and I, as believers, will get to talk to Naaman. We will get to talk. That's crazy. The commander of the Syrian army will get to talk with him. And so this is where I want to finish. As crazy it is for Naaman to humble himself, it speaks nothing of what's going to happen 1,000 years later because the God of the universe goes into that muddy water as well. And he doesn't have to lay down his false pride. He doesn't have to lay down his false bravado. But he, as being the creator of everything, who deserves all glory, he steps down into the muddy water, and I quote, to fulfill all righteousness. He fulfills all righteousness. So for us, and what we're going to end up finding for the 12 or 14 people who are being baptized this morning, they themselves are declaring before us, and I pray that you, if you've never been baptized at one point, would declare before the people of God and say, I too am laying down my pride, and I'm going to dip myself in this water according to his command to fulfill the righteousness that Jesus puts in front of me. And so it's a beautiful story altogether. As a matter of fact, in the rest of the Old Testament, the Jordan River is referenced like as a geographical location or something happens, but we're not given anybody going into the Jordan River for the rest of the Old Testament. Nobody steps into the Jordan River until we meet John the Baptist and Jesus again. Not again. The next person to go in the Jordan River, of course, people went in it. I'm just saying it's beautiful in the narrative that that's what takes place. Let me pray for us.